Okay, we had several more signups, but I think just to respect the people who are on time, we can start the conversation. I guess they will join in the meantime as time goes by. And also, there's also the recording. So welcome everyone to this month's meet and greet. We have several familiar faces out there, but in general, the meet and greets are a space that GNPT has held for several years now with different partners. This set of meet and greets we are hosting jointly with the PRISM partnership that Jackie will tell a little bit more about that. It's supported by the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations. And what we try to do in these meet and greets is to bring a mix of knowledge that's coming from academia and research, and also practitioners and people from our wider network, so that we can start to exchange knowledge and also bring it to other people who might not necessarily be doing research. They want to start in this field, they want to know a little bit more. So trying to make research, knowledge, and experiences more accessible to a wider public. My name is Andrea Sangil. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Network for Popular Transportation. And I'm gonna hand it over to Jackie. If you can introduce yourselves in the chat, because we're here to also meet each other, please do. Put your name, your affiliation, and where you're writing from, because we have a pretty international community. So I'll hand it over to Jackie to say some intro.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm Jackie Klopp. I'm a social scientist and I direct the Center for Sustainable Urban Development here at Columbia University's Climate School in New York. And I have the privilege of leading the Partnership for Research on Informal and Shared Mobility with the vision of really improving our understanding of informal and shared mobility with the view to really supporting the people who use those systems and work in those systems and rely on those systems, and whole economies are, you know, connected to these systems, as I think we're going to hear about today. And these informal and shared mobility modes have really been neglected in our planning and our policy. Uh, our PRISM network really has a vision of supporting the Global South researchers. We have 7 living labs across the Global South, and we really support South-South exchange. More recently, we've started a living lab here also in New York City with our commuter vans here. So also trying to destabilize the idea that this is just something in the Global South. In any case, it is really my pleasure to be part of this. And without further ado, I'll turn it back to Andrea. I'll put a little information about PRISM into the chat, and I welcome all of you here today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jackie. So the conversation we're having today, actually, we wanted to extend a bit the conversation we had in our previous meet and greet, where we were talking about climate action in the popular transport sector. But there was so much to talk about on electrification itself that we thought that it merited its own meet and greet, because there's so many dimensions that have to be taken into consideration if we're looking to electrify popular transport. And even within electrification, it's very different if we're talking about electrifying minibuses or if we're electrifying two-wheelers or three-wheelers. So this is a start. We're going to talk about two and three-wheelers right now because we've been working a lot on that. And it's also, as Tom will tell you, one of the sectors that's most fastly electrifying. So we're going to start. We have 3 speakers today. We have Tom Courtright. He is our trusted motorcycle guy. He knows a lot about two-wheelers and three-wheelers and a lot about electrification. He's going to give us an overview on what's the situation on electrification of two and three-wheelers in general around the world. What are the trends, the challenges? And that will give us like an intro. And then we're going to zoom into a situation in cities in Asia, Bangkok. That's where Piyaphat, aka Park, who is part of our PRISM network, We'll talk a little bit about their findings in Bangkok, and then we're going to switch over to Shantha, who is working in Africa in several countries, especially in Tanzania, and it's more outside of the cities, which is really important for us because the conversation usually goes around cities, but most of the places where people live are actually not necessarily cities, and there's a lot of smaller towns and communities that also need serving, and popular transport is very relevant there. So I'll give the floor to Tom. We'll have a space for conversation after, but also feel free to write your questions in the chat in the meantime as well. So I'll pass it over to Tom to start briefing us and kick it off there.
Thanks, Andrea. Pleasure to be here today. Andrea, I am going to ask if I have any issues, particularly if the slides aren't moving forward, please do yell out and let me know so I can fix that. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here today. So I'll share my screen here. So my name is Tom Courtright. I'm the researcher at E-Mobility Alliance, as well as the lead at the Lubyanza Research Group, which researches bodabodas, that is motorcycle taxis in Uganda in particular. I'm also doing my PhD on the topic. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see how this goes. So yeah, so I'm going to talk to you all about global 2- and 3-wheeler electrification from a very high level. And just some of the key trends, what's going on, what should we be sort of paying attention to. So first of all, why are we doing this in the first place? Apart from the obvious being emissions, actually in the case for informal transport workers, for most of them, the primary benefit a lot of the time is actually about it's about savings, right? It's about saving money on energy. Cost of fuel is very high. Cost of electricity is much cheaper. It's also about saving money on maintenance. So electric vehicles in general are simply much simpler mechanically, and they require less spare parts, break down less often. So those are all advantages. Obviously, 2- and 3-wheelers cheaper than electric cars. And then another one that we don't talk about enough is, most global South countries are oil importers, right? Or oil product importers. And there's a lot of money that countries spend just bringing in petrol or diesel from elsewhere. And that is a serious drain, and it can also lead to foreign exchange imbalances. And so it is beneficial to, instead of being dependent on a foreign energy source, be dependent on your own electricity source. And then finally, it also helps protect operators, formal transport operators, from rising petrol prices and air pollution. So next up, hopefully you all can see this next slide here. So in terms of trends, the most important thing here is that the price of batteries, which is the most expensive component, has dropped hugely, about by 90% over the last 10, 15 years. Something to keep in mind is that the capacity to manufacture lithium-ion batteries is almost entirely in China. So over 80% of battery cell production is in China. The advances haven't stopped, so there's new technologies that are coming up that could change things again. Sodium ion, for example, is a battery that does not use some of the more controversial elements like cobalt. It uses much more abundant elements, but it is quite heavy. So sodium ion could quite change things. And as a result, also of this push for 2- and 3-wheelers that really started in China like 10, 11 years ago, what we have now is a lot of battery swap systems that are coming up in many different places, be it in Bangkok or in Nairobi or Kampala or where have you. But I'll talk about that more in a little bit here. So in terms of battery swapping, the idea, okay, arguably multiple people have had the idea, but the first large-scale battery swap network was in Taiwan, a company called Gogoro. They focused on personal users rather than anything else. And what matters about battery swapping and why this is such a popular choice over 90% of the electric 2 and 3-wheelers in East Africa, for example, that's over 35,000 vehicles now, are on battery swap systems. And the reason is basically by removing the battery from the cost of the vehicle, you make it much more affordable for users. It also means that when that battery gets old, the company that owns it, right, the company that owns the battery swap network, they're the ones responsible for replacing it. So that's not like a huge cost when it comes along. It also solves range anxiety, right? Because instead of having to charge somewhere and wait for several hours to charge, instead you can just swap the battery in about 2 or 3 minutes. So there's swap networks in a lot of countries now. So be it in Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Benin, Togo, Brazil even. So they're coming up everywhere, and they're a great option for 2-wheelers. They're a little bit less common for 3-wheelers, but they are also there, particularly in India. So in terms of the regulatory landscape, there's been a bit of historical ambivalence by some governments. What you've had in some places was what happened in China basically is that local cities, municipalities made it very difficult to register new petrol 2-wheelers, and that created a huge level of demand for electric 2-wheelers. This was like 10, 12 years ago. And that's what really kickstarted the sector globally. And then what's happened basically is that countries that already have 2-wheeler manufacturing, so that's places like India, Indonesia, Thailand, tend to provide incentives only for locally manufactured electric 2-wheelers. So they provide some subsidies for electric 2-wheelers that are manufactured locally or have a very high degree of local value addition. Whereas import-dependent countries, even if there's local assembly, still import-dependent, like Rwanda, Kenya, Panama, or so on, tend to instead focus just on reducing the tax burden on importing them, or on VAT, or on any of the other taxes in that chain. So the main emphasis really is a fiscal one. There's been other incentives as well. I mean, for example, in Rwanda, the government said that public land that companies could set up charging or swapping infrastructure for free on public land that is government-owned land wasn't really taken up because that land wasn't all that useful, it wasn't in the right place, and so on and so forth. So the main thing really has been the fiscal incentives. So yeah, again, apart from the fiscal incentives, electrification targets, right? So a government saying we're going to try to have 50% sales by year X really helps push things forward. In Rwanda, for example, at the beginning of this year, the Rwandan government made it so that you can no longer register a petrol motorcycle for motorcycle taxi business in Kigali. So that has created a huge wave. I mean, there was already progress was going in the right direction, and now it's really sped it up. Ethiopia was the first country in the world, of course, to ban the import of petrol vehicles of all kinds. So there's a lot of leadership in global South countries on this matter. And you can see here from this chart, growth starts out kind of slow, barely noticeable, but then it just starts accelerating. So like growth right now of electric 2-wheelers in most East African countries, it's doubling every year, at least doubling. So we're going in the right direction. The other thing is, we do need to have some guardrails. So this, for the most part, is safety and quality standards. Some of these already exist, electrical standards, basically, for example, around high voltage systems and so on. But some also need to be implemented that are specific to electric vehicle systems. So just really briefly, again, on the battery swapping and charging thing to understand the difference. So when you own your own vehicle, and you own the battery with it as well, when you own the battery in its entirety, then you can charge at home. You can charge if public chargers exist for it. A lot of the time, public chargers are not built for 2 or 3-wheelers. Or you could charge at any public socket. You pay a lot less to charge because of the fact that you're only paying directly for that electricity. right? There's no other margin in between unless you're charging from a public charger point. Charging does take a lot longer, so typically charging 2 and 3 wheelers that are for charging, most of the time they're for personal use rather than commercial use, but that's not always true. Of course, it does mean that you need to be able to have access to electricity at home, and you need to have safe and reliable access to electricity at home to charge. So there are places where there's very informal electricity connections that might be dangerous. So swapping basically, the idea is to take care of all that. And what you give up when you swap, essentially, or when you move to a swap system is autonomy to some degree, because you are now dependent on the company that's providing the battery swapping, right? And so there are some understandable concerns about if you're entirely dependent on that company and either they go bankrupt or they decide to drastically increase their prices, you already own the motorcycle, you're locked into their network. And so there is, some potential there for the well-known downsides of monopolization. So just kind of briefly, the other challenges remaining, right? You have to build the charging infra and deploy the vehicles at the same time, right? So it's a chicken and egg kind of situation. And especially if you have charging infra and not swapping infra, then you need to coordinate on that if you have 2 different players doing those things. You need to make sure that your vehicle fits the market, right? So what happened a few times now is that a lot of Asian megacities are very flat cities. And so a 48-volt system works just fine. If you come to Africa, especially if you go to East Africa, let me be clear, West Africa, parts of West Africa are also quite flat, but you go to hilly East Africa, it will not work. And there's plenty of great videos set to dramatic music of Asian electric motorcycles failing to make it up hills in Kigali. And then also, we need to understand that the financing costs are still quite high, particularly in some places. In a lot of Africa in particular, financing costs are very high. You're looking at 40-50% annual interest rates. Somebody earlier today here in Bangkok was complaining to me about 10% annual interest rates, and it was difficult for me to listen to and sympathize with. But everywhere we need to bring down the interest rates because these affect operators who are delivering transport for everyone. So just quickly then to try to wrap us up a little bit. In terms of policy recommendations, we need to reduce import taxes, but do that in a clearly planned manner, right? So, and this is where it ties into number 2 about tying tax incentives to local sourcing. So a lot of the time governments will just do this in their annual budget, right? Called the Finance Act in some countries. And then the problem is that nobody knows if that will still be in place next year, right? Like 9 months from now, it might have changed. And that's happened. So what is needed is basically for governments to have very clear roadmaps saying, for example, we're going to reduce import duty by this much for 3 years or something like this. But then after this point, for you to get this incentive, you need to have this degree of like local manufacturing, of local value addition, for example. Governments should have some clear rules for charging and swapping, at least make it possible to set up charge stations. In some countries, it's basically reselling electricity, and in some countries that isn't legal unless you have a very difficult to get license from the government. So there needs to be a bit of policy reformulation there in some countries. We need those safety standards that I mentioned, and we also need to have some clear phase out timelines for ICE vehicles, so we know exactly by when electric 2-wheelers should be running the streets. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. I think there's a really good opportunity right now to take those policy recommendations in so many places where cities are starting to draft the regulation on 2-wheelers or 3-wheelers per se. And so if they're going to start formalizing, recognizing, regulating, then like we could start even incorporating those considerations for electrification at the same time. I think we're at a good moment right now where there's demand in a lot of places to start incorporating the 2 and 3-wheelers into the wider transport system planning. So thinking ahead or thinking currently, because it's already a thing, these policy recommendations would be worth incorporating in that type of conversations and processes. We're going to start doing this a little with several countries around the world. So thanks so much, Tom, for bringing us that oversight. If anyone has questions for Tom, we're going to do questions at the end for like just a more casual exchange and conversation. So we're gonna move forward to Park, who's gonna tell us a little bit about the opportunities and challenges in Bangkok.
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. Hope you guys see my screen right now. Good. All clear? All right.
Yeah.
So hello all. My name is Piyaphat Chaemchuen, and an associate researcher from Bangkok Living Lab here, Thailand. And I'm happy to see you all here again. And today I would like to talk about my work, which is about infrastructure for popular transportation here in Bangkok. Okay. So here's an outline here. I would like to cover all these 5 topics here, starting from some introduction and then go to my work, and then yeah, let's go for it. Okay. So as you may know that Bangkok, there's one popular transportation called motorbike taxi. Okay. It's very popular according to the Office of Transport Planning 2022 report. There are 500,000 trips a day. That's really huge for mobility here in Bangkok. Even this one, this picture is, I think, was taken during the summer. Even on the hot day, it's still popular here. You can see people, parking in the shade here, waiting for the traffic light. Okay. So, and I just want to talk a little bit about Bangkok Living Lab here, what we are studying. Okay. We try to study on how to shift the ICE paradigm to EV paradigm for motorbike taxi in Bangkok specifically. And last year we also studied about we mapped the motorbike taxi ecosystem in Bangkok. We also delineate the business model that's incorporated with the ecosystem here. And we also have another branch which is related about the infrastructure planning, my work here, and that's my work that I'm gonna say today. Okay, so for my work, we're gonna focus on the refueling station. Okay, which is charging and swapping sites, and is very good at for the first step for the spatial planning study here. So okay, so my work we try to focus on 3 people actually. The first one is Wind Driver. For those who doesn't know Wind Driver, so Wind Driver is the conventional motorbike taxi driver. He do the passenger delivery only, and he not really roam around the city. But once he deliver the passenger, he will go back to his post, and the post is something like this. This is some kind of informal post here on the left-hand side. And we also focus on the platform-based rider. Okay, so this guy, he or she will focus on the passenger delivery and food delivery. And the behavior is that they gonna roaming across Bangkok. Okay, they just take the passenger, they deliver the passenger into the destination, or they just pick the food and then deliver the food, something like that. And another guy, a hybrid wind, a wind who drive for the platform as well. So in this case, for my model here, we will treat him as a platform-based rider because he doesn't have to go back to his post. Okay. So, okay. Oh, oops. Okay. So here is the situation here in Bangkok. This is a map here. The black square here is all the food POI, all the restaurant across Bangkok. And the orange triangle is the wind stand across the Bangkok again. And we also have the shapefile of the boundary of for each district for the Bangkok as well. Color with the number of household and the population here. You can see a lot of POIs right in the center of Bangkok here. and most of the people tend to live, at the edge of the Bangkok at the west, right? And on the picture on the right-hand side here, we also have the current station, charging or swapping station here. We got about three brands, right? SM, Strom, and Swap and Go, scattered across the Bangkok here, okay? So my work there's two main parts in my work. One is the demand simulation work, okay? And another one is a station optimization. The first one is to see where we need, where the driver needs the station, okay? And the second part is that where to put a station in Bangkok, okay? Because we are in the, let's say in our country, in Thailand, and especially in Bangkok, it's hard to find the data. So that's why we need to simulate it with some kind of constraint, some kind of boundary condition that's may reflect the real life situation here, okay? So as a flow chart here, we start and then we go to the demand simulation. We identify where is this low state of charge, or where we need where most people running out of the battery, right? And then we use this knowledge into the station optimization here, and then we do like post GIS analysis here. Okay, let's start with the demand simulation. For the inputs, okay, we need what we need. We need the road network in Bangkok. Okay, we need POI, we need wind stand, we need some kind of population data, we need some kind of like popularity of those POI. And I'm scoping this with a Google review. And we also have the data for the motorbike taxi model here. And this is gonna be the average value, okay? And we try to simulate these three people, like I just said. The first one is wind rider, right? And the second one, platform-based rider for the food delivery. And for the third one is a platform-based rider for the passenger delivery. The differences between the passenger delivery for the platform-based rider and food delivery for platform-based rider is how we sample the origin, okay? So for the food delivery, we will pick the POI, the food restaurant, as the origin of the order, right? Those people need to go to pick up the, the food at the restaurant. But we're gonna weight it by the popularities of those POI. The more popular, the more order, basically in that way. And for the passenger delivery, we will use the road graph weighted by the population. A lot of people live, there should have more demands on the delivery as well. And for the wind rider, it's gonna be OD or look. That's easy, right? So here is a sample of the OD simulation here. For example, the OD is destination, right? And the green circle here is the origin here. We will calculate the shorted parts on that one, and we will keep that shorted parts to use into like a fuel consumptions calculation inside the model again. But this is just show how we calculate it, okay? And let's move to the station optimization, which is kind of interesting here. So for the optimization, basically we try to make everyone happy, okay? We try to make everyone happy by minimize unhappiness. Mathematically, it's called loss function. For those who don't like that much mathematics, this looks scary, right? But here I say something easy here. Okay, so we will have 4 parts on the unhappiness equation here. Okay, the first one is gonna related to the detour time. Let's keep that in mind. The B, the energy leaks. The C is coverage reward, and the D is the load access penalty. So the first term is basically, can the driver find the station within 10 minutes control? Okay, that's the number one. Number two is that can the driver find the station within 2 kilometers? Okay. And the third component here is just a corporate reward. If the driver find the station within 4 minutes, we will get score 1. Okay. Within 4 to 8, we will get 0.5 score. Okay. Within 10 minutes, we will get 0 to 5 score. Okay. And we also have the load accessibility component here to penalize if whether it's easy to access, is it in the middle of the street, something like that, right? Because the charging system should not be in the middle of the street, so we need to think about it as well. So this is my unhappiness function, and we try to minimize this one, make everyone happy, okay? And this is a result. So the grid is a demand, okay? The more rate, the more demand, okay? You see the inside of the Bangkok, there's a lot of demand here. And then we also have the age of the west side of the Bangkok. Maybe because of the POI rating and also the population make this, higher demand compared to the east side here in my mouse here, right? So this west and east, right? Okay. So most of the demand located inside of the city and the west side. Okay. And according to this function here, this equation here, we come up with the new station for 153 station located here in the purple circle here. Okay. I'm not gonna drive that much about the equation here, but so this is the result. Okay. And for the next step, for this one, I got some idea from folks when I was in Gothenburg. Okay, I think it's from someone in here, I think. And we talk about the land use ownership, because once we got this right, we know where to put the station. But about the land use ownership is it's very important to know which station we should invest first. We should implement it, right? And if we got, I mean, right now I'm trying to find, such a kind of information for the Bangkok ownership share file, but we still doesn't have that one. But once we got that one, we just layer it another layer. See, and we will have we will know the number of new stations that located in the public space, and maybe those stations would be the station that we need to implement first. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about limitation here. So here's the thing. So my study is show just only simulation and mathematical siting approach. Okay, and it's good as the loss function and my assumption. Okay. And because of I treat all station as a generics, okay, as a refill station, okay, which is charging or swapping stations. So brand compatibility may restrict who can use which station. That's number one. So, but because of that, like I said, our current result assume interoperability here. But again, if at the end of the day, in the next 10 years, in Thailand, the market just split only 2 incompatible standards or 3 standards. This method still can be applied, okay? So we can just, for example, if we got 2 incompatible standards, right? For brand A and brand B. So we just run the first loop for brand A, right? And we will get the station for brand A. And for band B, we just run another loop. Okay, so we get the station for band B. So it makes sense. And again, it's finally for this one, it's only spatial analysis. Okay, we doesn't include any temporal parameter here in the loss function. That's why if you want to talk about the queue, about the traffic inside the station, we doesn't have that yet. But again, in the future, if we have the data, that can be done easily. Okay. So again, thank you for your attention. All of my code, I mean here, all the models here. It's right there in my GitHub here, Piyaphat. And if you want to ask me some question like mathematically, here's my email. If you want to join or want to do the collaboration, again, please send me an email. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think we have a good audience to receive this type of research. There's several people that are into charging infrastructure that are part of like the private sector who might be interested in actually using these types of models to prioritize where the stations could be established. So I hope some collaboration comes out of this. That's the whole point of the meet and greets. I have some questions for you, but I'll save them for after.
All right.
So we can head over to Shantha. Shantha, here you are. We're gonna do a disruptive change and head over to outside of the cities. And Shantha was the first person who popped into my mind when we wanted to think about this. I met her a couple of years ago in the Africa Climate Week and was really impressed by her work. So Shantha, the floor is yours to tell us a bit about your experience with Mobility for Africa.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. Great to be on board. I feel like my presentation is a little bit more visual and less academic. And I actually, I'm going to just talk through what we're doing and some of the issues. And I've got some photos I just actually took in China. But just to give background, I lived in China for 3 years from 2014 to 17, and I witnessed the beginning of what is an electric revolution happening there faster. I've just come back from 3 weeks, and every time I go, I'm like, whoa. The thing that really struck me, because I had spent most of my career working in Africa and very frustrated by the fact that, you know, we still rationalize women walking with heavy loads and don't seem to think that's a problem. So I came into this going, wow, look at mobility. It's ubiquitous. And, you know, so your poorest person can have a scooter or a sandwicher, which is what the tricycle's called. It's different than a tuk-tuk. And I thought, my gosh, why can't we bring this to the bottom, to the, you know, the people that need transport the most? And so I started without knowing much about energy, and that's been a huge learning challenge for us as we've tested out fleets predominantly in rural and peri-urban areas. I mean, we're very small still. It's very frustrating because, as Tom was saying, financing is incredibly difficult. But I'm really, really excited about the potential of electric mobility, and I think what I'm hoping is that you know, in some parts of the world, the luxury is, should we replace, you know, ICE vehicles with electric? Great. You know, if you're America and have 800 vehicles per 1,000, you've got more transport than anyone else. But if you look at the ratio in Africa, it's extraordinarily low. We have, you know, on average 44 vehicles per 1,000. And if you break that down between urban and rural and South Africa and Kenya and Nigeria, you know, you're getting to countries where there is a deficit, a huge deficit of transport. I think the other thing is we tend to focus on transport just for passengers. And obviously, I entered this space with, you know, thinking of the rural woman who carries everything and spends hours every day in drudgery. And what was really interesting when we started, you know, we did research in China, and China 40 years ago didn't have the sandwicher. I mean, it had bicycles, but the sandwicher sort of was first pedal, then went to petrol, and then now is pretty much exclusively electric. And the beauty is it can be used for many different things. So it can be, you know, and the beauty with electric is you can stylize it and create different models. The design is essentially the easiest aspect. The more difficult aspect is the charging infrastructure. And I think, you know, we across the continent have a huge energy deficit. We spend millions of dollars on petrol imports, as Tom said, but we also run generators. I mean, people don't have, you know, now there is the potential of battery storage and solar, but essentially traditionally people in rural or peri-urban areas or even urban areas were backing up and using diesel generator. So we've had a problem that we haven't really had an opportunity to rethink or address. And the beauty is that if we leverage electric transport to solve the mobility crisis, we can unlock huge value and potential. Not only, obviously in agribusiness where we've been working with small-scale farmers to prove that they are viable, but also in many other aspects of logistics. And not just, I think that's why I'm in love with the three-wheeler, because a three-wheeler will carry 400 kg, double what a motorbike will carry. It can, in the case of an electric tricycle, we call this the Humber in Zimbabwe, it's easy for a woman to drive. She doesn't need to straddle. It goes slowly. Speed is not the objective here. I mean, the boys like speed, but usually our customers just want, stability. So you've got this potential to move goods. I mean, 400 kg can fit 60 cabbages. It can fit loads of tomatoes. It can, it can do a lot of, this is a milk collection centre. So if you look at dairy, for example, if you want to carry a 20-litre dairy, that's very heavy. And if you leave 20 litres at home, you're losing your income. So we've been working with dairy farmers. We've been working with mixed farming. One of the biggest challenges I've faced on this journey is that obviously there's a lot of momentum around East Africa and the two-wheeler space because there's an existing business model. And people look at this woman who's Gogo, who's most probably 50, 60 years old, and they just assume she's too poor. And the stereotype of rural small-scale farmers is entrenched with them being too poor. No one wants to finance them. They're in the informal economy. And so it's been very difficult to de-risk them. And I know, and I say this all the time, my son says to me, if you just would stop talking about women, maybe you'd get more investors. I can't help myself because I do this for the women, and they are 50% of the population, if not more, and they carry the burden of most families, and they are the most honest, productive, and pay on time. And we have 70% of our drivers are women. We used to have exclusive, and I can tell you they are the ones that do not have accidents and do not drink drive. So, and they pay on time. So I don't know what else I need to tell the bankers, because the bankers don't seem to believe me. So we've been working with fleets, and I'm going to show some slides here, but I think the thing is, so we have shared mobility. So we go into a community and we map a 30-kilometre radius. We've designed our own batteries, which has been a huge journey of R&D. And this is one thing that I am frustrated by in the continent, because one is the incentives to bring, to reduce the import of ICE vehicles. But the second is, if we do not do R&D for our continent, which especially in rural means bumpy roads, rocky conditions, high heat extremes, we're just going to import toxic waste. And it's already happening in the battery storage space because people are just importing and not knowing what they're buying. But in terms of mobility, it's even more tricky. In China, this tricycle, when I first started, was used with the lead-acid battery. China has cheap power in rural and urban. It's easy for someone to go home and charge it over 8 hours while they're asleep. That does not happen in our continent. Lead acid wouldn't work. We tested it. We went through lithium ion. We thought, oh, lithium, everyone talks about lithium. But even that wouldn't work because the roads, it didn't have a battery management system. We didn't know what the cells were like. So I think there's a lot of work. There's the 60 cabbages. There's a lot of work that needs to happen in the R&D space. The other thing that I think, which I saw and observed in China was, I mean, if anyone's been to China, you'll see three-wheelers being used for garbage collection, for service delivery, in rural and urban areas. China, just from a policy point of view, had no barriers to entry for the tricycle. So there was no licensing or vehicle registration, or drivers didn't need to get licensed. And one of my biggest challenges in Southern Africa is we still have very ominous and expensive vehicle registration, but especially for two-wheelers. And for three-wheelers, no one knows. Three-wheeler tricycles, But unfortunately in Zim, they just classified it as a motorbike. So I'm fighting policy constantly, because if we, if you want to charge a rural person, $70 to register their vehicle and require insurance, and that $70 needs to be paid, twice a year, and you also need to get a motorbike license, which is going to cost you another $200 to get lessons, you are making it prohibitive, and we will never get to the bottom of the market. And why is that such an issue? Well, I mean, there's a justice issue in it, because these are the people that should be getting prioritized. But secondly, you're reducing the potential market, which is, 700 million people live in rural. Going back to the size of your average city or town, it's 100 to 300,000 people. We have a few mega cities like Nairobi, Lagos, Addis, but the majority of Africans don't live in mega cities. And we actually don't want to create more mega cities because we do not have the infrastructure and the jobs to cater for them. And that's, also why we need to think in the context of transport and the social and economic issues that it translates to. But so, for example, this photo is a clinic. So we did a test. We worked with police, agro-tech officers that go around and help rural farmers, and the health clinic. One clinic, Igava Clinic, used this tricycle for vaccines during COVID, under 5, polio. I mean, they had the best coverage. And they, as a team, were all trained to drive. And essentially, they could go and deliver mobile services within this 30-kilometre radius with a catchment of 6,000 people. And, they would pay for a battery swap, or we gave the battery swap to both the police and the agri-tech workers. We normally charge for a battery swap. We fill up the tank, as Tom said. That's our business model. But, I mean, I've been pushing, and if we could improve service delivery in Africa, that would be huge. And the utility of the tricycle means, you don't have a lot of government clinics and the health, don't have budgets for recurrent costs. Salaries are 90% of their budget. So if they can have a tricycle with a small fleet with some solar and some batteries, they can run much more efficiently. The police in Igava, 30 police covering a 30-kilometre radius with no transport. You can imagine one tricycle, they now can do domestic violence, they can go and do cattle theft, and it's a motivating factor for civil servants. Just quickly to talk about the technology transfer. So obviously, because I took the Sandlicher off the shelf from China, we have been busy trying to build a battery that fits for purpose. I quickly realized after our first 2 years that we needed a bespoke battery. So I've got myself an amazing technology partner who used to work at Tesla and has been very kind and committed. And essentially, we're building a BMS a battery management system that will manage our cells to deal with rough terrain, also to capture data. In rural areas, data is still very expensive in Africa. In rural Zimbabwe, we don't have data. So we've been testing a low frequency system and then using Starlink at our stations. So eventually we can collect the kilometers, we can monitor remotely the cells and the degradation, but we can also get data on how many swaps that battery went through, who swapped it. We've built a digital platform, but it's just now the additional resources need to get it operational. And it's not the software, it's the hardware that's a challenge. I think the other thing is that, we created, we're the first tricycle assembly. We've done everything with the objective of green jobs and skills transfer. So we started with assembling the tricycle, and now we've also do local assembly of the battery. We've mapped and designed our own version of the tricycle that is fixed with our batteries, because obviously the batteries used in China weren't as sophisticated as the one we have, and we developed a curriculum. I'm a little bit despondent, I admit, because I feel that we have we don't have the sense of urgency that we need to build the ecosystem to support the electric transport shift in Africa. We have, a lot of startups, some more successful than others, some raising a lot of capital. We now see the advent of charging stations, which everyone loves, like charging swapping cabinets, which mean you don't have to pay for anyone, and magically the battery gets charged and swapped. My cynicism is, as soon as you move out of urban areas, you are going to see a lot of problems. And if you don't train low-skilled workers to be part of the value chain, you will just create, the battery might last for 12 months, 18 months, but you won't be getting the full value of its battery. So I've just realized it's much harder than I thought, the technology transfer and the green skill building. Batteries are much more complicated. So as Tom said, EV's better because you have less components, but the battery is the critical component. So if you're not, there is a reason Elon Musk was so far ahead with Tesla, because he did a hell of a lot of research and development. So we've been really focused on this, and how do we, and I would say we now have a really good battery. It's a dual purpose charging system, so it can be used for storage. It can go 100 kilometers with a 400 kg load. But we're still working on a BMS. We've got BMS 3.0 we need to roll out. And we did battery skill building for our technicians, but energy is a complicated subject, and I see huge opportunity that we need to start, educating people now in what energy and kilowatts mean. In Africa, I see the importance of battery swapping and charging infrastructure, because you need to invest in energy generation. There isn't energy to buy. And if you do buy it off the grid, it's expensive. So essentially, solar being your main source of energy is the best. So we have mixed charging. So our charging system, which also serves as storage, can be charged from diesel, from a generator, from the grid, from solar. But we've underestimated our energy consumption. So now we are an intensive energy user. And obviously, if you're offering battery swapping, you need to make sure you have a full tank all the time. And that's been one of the challenges. We underestimated the ratio of batteries we needed, and we underestimated the energy requirements. And, during the last few years, the price of energy has doubled in Zim. It's now 23 cents a kilowatt. So that means, your operational expenses go up a lot. So we need more money in the mini grid to make that work. We've been working on, how do we prove that this can be a scalable model? And, I'm convinced it can be, but you need, as I said, the investment in communities. Peri-urban, rural, even urban, if you want to capture, high density, you need people that understand how the batteries work, can quickly fix problems, service. Our tricycles have been operating since 2019. But of course, we had spare parts. We could replace the motor. We could replace the controller. We did a paint job, but the actual metal chassis, there's no reason it can't last if you look after them. On average, motorbikes, ICE motorbikes, last 2 years usually in Africa. And so we just got to learn from the mistakes that we've made. So that's part of our training course. We piloted a training course for 20 students. Most of them hadn't, had a basic O-level, basic high school. So yes, I know I've spoken a lot, but it's a very exciting sector. I just think that we say 2- and 3-wheelers, they are very different industries, and I think that while everyone is focused on 2-wheelers in Africa, at least, I wish there was a little bit more confidence in experimenting in the 3-wheeler sector and beyond the mega cities. But hopefully, if there's anyone out there that wants to come and be part of it, there's a lot of research that we need to do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Shantha. And yeah, that's precisely why we're here, to start connecting, the academic world with the practitioner world. Thanks so much for your insights, because it's also very different to study something from like theory than also receiving the insights on the ground, the barriers and the challenges that come up once you start trying to implement something. So it's super valuable to have those insights. I'm going to open the floor to questions. There's been some in the chat, but I see Benji very politely raised his hand. So Benji, do you want to kick us off on the questions and say hi too?
Yes, happy to. And I will keep my video off. Can you hear me clearly, Andrea?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep my video off because I'm in a coffee shop. This is really great. I was wondering, so two thoughts came into my head as I was listening to this just excellent work and excellent presentation. I was in Cape Town and Stellenbosch just last week and took a look and went on tour with Tinus Buizen, who I'm sure you must be connected to because you're connected with Tom Courtright. And they're electric and electronic engineers, and they are developing their own local BMS. They're looking at the South African market, which has a very developed battery market that mainly caters to in-house generation, because as you know, they have power problems and do load shedding. So they have a deep understanding. I wonder if you're in touch and wonder if you can cross-learn, right? BMS design and BMS programming and whatever else with Tinus's engineers. The other that occurred to me as I was thinking about this was, of course, the Global Energy Something Alliance for People and Planet, which was led by, I think, Rockefeller Foundation and IKEA Foundation. I'm not sure anymore. It's a global alliance for energy and the planet. And their mission is off-grid renewable for microgrids. And I wonder if some sort of introduction would help. That there is kind of, the problem I see is that the people who are working on this are, because there's nothing in on the ground, they're trying to solve every part of the value chain, including the local generation. And if there was a way to kind of connect the people who are working on local generation, and then using that to empower the battery swapping and the training of people managing both the battery swaps and maybe also the local grid storage. I know this is just all ideas and would love your reaction to it.
No, thank you. Thank you. All welcome suggestions. I started this project in Zimbabwe, which unfortunately politics plays such a negative impact on our world, as we all know. And Zimbabwe, it's the wrong country. It's a great country, has amazing young people, amazing farmers. But people like the Rockefeller Foundation, like the Gap, IKEA, the Shell, there are only 5 countries. I'm a little bit cynical and jaded, to be frank with you. And I think if we want to be serious about climate, we have to invest in action wherever it's happening and stop deciding we want to be in the top hot country that we all like. So yes, I get a lot of rejection from people I don't think I should get rejected from, who invest in companies in Kenya, because Kenya everyone loves. So I won't go on, but I will take your heed and I will definitely reach out. There is a lot going on in Joburg and South Africa. I mean, I live between the two. I think sometimes South Africa, it's a different context, and South Africa tends to focus on the formal economy a lot more. So it's finding the right partners that actually also want to move into the informal economy and test. Real R&D in those economies. So thank you. I will connect with them definitely.
Just for the reaction, Tinus Buizen is completely focused on minibus taxis and the informal economy, both in the 4-wheelers and the 2-wheelers. So I think that would be something. I think you're pointing to really we should have a pan-African approach to this. And I totally hear you on the frustration with funders, because I'm a not-for-profit too, and we bang our heads against the funders and are come with our begging bowls and have been told yes, no many times rather than anyway, that's a reaction. Thank you so much for this one.
Thanks so much. Jackie, I know you have a lot of questions and some of them are in the chat, but I just wanted to give some space if anyone else has any questions, and then we can maybe close off with Jackie's questions as well. Anyone have any questions for any of the panelists? No? Okay, then, Jackie. I have one, but I'll say.
Well, I was curious since we were talking about financing. Shantha, it's really impressive, like Benji said. I'm curious, who is supporting you right now? What is your sort of business model for expanding this work? Is there a model where, you can get a return on investment, or
Yes.
does this need to be grant driven? Yeah.
No, I mean, I think we needed the grant funding, and we most probably still need more grant funding for R&D, because no one likes to fund R&D, unfortunately, normally, unless you're in Silicon Valley, maybe. But I think, so we have our business model is that we go into a community. The formula we now need is 100 kVA of PV solar, and that will support a fleet of 50 tricycles. We choose our drivers. We don't choose those who can buy. We have tested different business models, rentals for women, taxi and transport, but we realized we needed to just have one simple business model. So that's a lease to purchase. So we choose our 50 drivers within that 30-kilometre radius. They have to be committed to shared transport and logistics, or they need to be running an enterprise that requires, transport. It's going to add value to their business. And once they're qualified, obviously we train them, and they then have to commit to swapping at least 4 batteries a week. Now, that's very different than the urban model. So if you're talking to Ampersand or others, their calculation is, many more swaps a day. We have a bigger battery. And obviously for the rural distances, it changes, but on average you're doing, peri-urban is 7 kilometres, but if you go to more rural areas, you're looking at 10 or 15 kilometres per trip. So you want to give enough energy for the tricycle to be swapped. They pay for the swap, and essentially what we want to do, so we've really become a mini grid operator, but we don't put copper cable connections in, which reduces your cost dramatically. I mean, our in CapEx investment is around $300,000 for 50 tricycles, PV solar, installation. And we have a team of 3 people at each of our charging sites who manage that fleet. So trained in batteries, spare parts, repairs. And, I'm sort of, last year was when we tested the lease to purchase model. Now in Zim, as I said, you're not having the Incopas or Watus, the middleman that provide financing. And we've been trying to get the banks to finance our customers. So there's 2 types of financing: the asset financing we need for the CapEx and the tricycle imports, but then obviously the asset, the financing for the lease to purchase. So we did a model where we used a 12-month, customers had to pay $45 a week plus the $20 for battery swaps. And we knew that for most of our drivers, $45 a week was going to be they needed 2 years to pay back. But what's remarkable is the commitment to which people have paid. Some have paid off quickly, and the catalytic impact it has on their incomes. So for me, obviously, I don't want to, we have to be financially viable, but if you as a driver are not living and earning enough to improve your life, then there's no incentive. But most of our women, and obviously it's very hard in rural areas because people don't bank money, you can't, it's more about what assets they've financed. And we've seen really great, impacts. I'm happy to share some of our qualitative work on this. And so, my argument is transport is such a big burden on any economic development. So in rural, it's loss of productivity, it's social outcomes. In urban, of course, it's time, sexism. Women have to deal with all sorts of terrible things as they travel home, night, hours wasted. I mean, I live in Joburg sometimes, and it's terrible what, commuters have to deal with. So I think the thing is, if you can do it in a way that improves people's incomes or quality of life, it's catalytic. And people don't want to go back. I mean, our rural women, a lot of our focus groups talked about drudgery, and I think we've romanticized the African woman being just carrying everything. And they will tell you it's drudgery. It's painful when they have a tricycle. Do you think they want to give it up? It's like, no. And my other take home is that on the gender, I've had a lot of pressure from people to stop having a ratio of women drivers, right? They're like, well, this is why you can't raise more capital because you're too focused on women, which the fact is, if you don't have a pro-gender approach to this, it will be men that always dominate transport. And what we've seen in our 8 sites is, while some of them are very patriarchal and it takes a while to get the women really in the driver's seat, the men shift their attitude, because the women, if they're earning more money, they're not nagging their husbands. If they've got extra money to pay for the kids to go to a different school, if they want to buy a new pot, it's really simple, but it is that sort of empowerment. And the husbands are usually quite happy because, well, she's doing all the work, she cooks me dinner and I'm happy. She's less tired. That's good. So but you need to give 6 months. You need to push that gender. If you don't, the boys will always get the toys.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have.
No, that's fine. I lived in rural Kenya as a young person. I understand those dynamics really well. It's pretty incredible what you're doing. So thank you. And I would just, since we have all these wonderful young scholars here, I'm curious if you could go and talk a little bit more about what kind of research you would like to see happen. And maybe that also connects us to Tom and Park's work.
So we've struggled. We've done focus group. We've done focus groups. We did a lot at first. We've done data collection. What we struggle with is, I have a very young team, and we don't have very sophisticated analysis. So often, it comes to what are the questions we should be measuring or asking, both on the technology side of it, but also on the community, the social impact, the economic impact. And then if we collect the data, who and how are we analysing it? And it's always been a gap. We've had various internships. We're always open to students coming. But I think there's an exciting piece of research just in terms of, obviously the technology, but, and the energy usage and the link to mini grids and mobile energy as a service rather than connections. And then I think there's a whole issue around transport and quality of life and gender. And then there's a huge chance. We wanted to do a study with the health system, and we didn't get it through. But to basically test, from test 10 health clinics with tricycles and, off-grid energy, the batteries could be used for their solar, and then look at our health outcomes. So it's not just, we got a lot of data I can send you from the one clinic, but, can you compare it with the cost of operational other sorts of transport? And are you seeing improvements so that it could be scaled, and it doesn't? Because I think that's where we also could have game changers if we invested in service delivery, both in rural and urban. Garbage collection is a nightmare in most urban areas. And, so, I would love to get, so while you say I've got a business model I think is viable, but I also think there is room for grant funding for experimenting how fleets can be used by different types of stakeholders to improve, especially service delivery, I think, urban and rural. I mean, we had a cholera outbreak in one of the high density areas, and most of it was garbage. And, you know, I didn't manage to get it, but I wanted to set up a fleet and just go around and collect the garbage because, you know, half the time it's a huge problem. So anyway, I'm very open to any ideas about how we can experiment, because I think if we can build the academic knowledge and push, then we can start to see people seeing it as beyond a charity, you know, and that's sometimes because I put women, you know, people think, oh, you just, I don't think it has to be a charity. It doesn't. It can make a lot of economic sense. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, thank you. I think there needs to be a lot more of this kind of cost benefit analysis of investing in these systems. And I really appreciate your rural focus. I think that's really important as well. So thank you.
I actually wanted to segue that final part on finding the academic evidence to make a push towards changes actually in policy. So I'll throw my question in, but I also see Chatty put a question there regarding the situation with vehicles being unfit for the actual terrains. And I think that's something that Tom can maybe talk about a little bit more on how regulation and policy could try to create the conditions so that vehicles are fit for the current context. So I'll put this policy question for both Bart and Tom. Tom, on the vehicles, like how can regulation play a part in that? And if you have any examples on how that has been done, or if it hasn't, how it should be done. And then also maybe for Park, you're at a point where you have a lot of answers from this model. How can we turn that into some responses from policy or also from private actors? Or how are you engaging, or is this a next step that would have to be done to show this to other stakeholders and say, we have this modeling, this is the areas we should prioritize. How do we take that into reality? So whomever wants to go first.
I can
Tom,
go
you
ahead
open your mic, so go ahead.
Oh, sure. So yeah, so unfortunately, I think my answer to your question about what regulation can do to help product market fit, I unfortunately I don't think it can do a whole lot. To be honest, I think because basically, if you come in as a retailer and you bring in a vehicle and it's not quite working for the market, you're not going to make many sales and you're going to change your product. So I think in general, you know, people tend to fix that on their own. And I don't think that governments tend to know what product is needed by consumers. Governments don't tend to do those kind of, you know, broad customer surveys or whatever, and the kind of intensive testing that, you know, somebody like Shantha is doing in the field, right? Like you're getting this feedback constantly, that feedback loop that you get from the women and people that are driving the Hambas, you know, that's critical. So I think it's actually much more about actually supporting folks like Shantha. And I think that the point that she's making about rural areas is a really good one, and one I would second, which is that things are going to be different when we get out of the cities. And in some cases, we're going to need different products. Some countries, like Zim and some others, have very little electricity access in rural areas, and it might have an impact even on products. You might need to go with a bigger battery. You might need to put up more solar PV in addition to the grid. So yeah, that's all I would say on that. I think that we just need to support people to test out products in new places, and you know, trust that they're going to find what works, because otherwise, if they don't, you know, the whole enterprise won't function anyway.
Yeah, and to answer your question, okay. So what should be the next step for me, right? From the model to the reality, right? So I think the next step is should be something like we need a proof whether my model is right or wrong, right? So maybe we can do a pilot thing to see maybe in a small area and to see the real world distribution of this randomness of the order, right? The randomness of the passenger things, right? Right now in the model is all average. For example, speed, for example, the kind like behavior of the driver, something like that. It's all static here. But for the next step, maybe we need to add more something dynamic in a small scale and then see the efficiency of it before we scale it up into the bigger scale. And once we got the fine-tuned modeling, I think we got some tools to make it sound, right? Make some sound to this ecosystem, and then we can talk to the the decision maker. In this case, I think BMA, the Bangkok Metropolitan Administrator, they are main player here in Bangkok to to make the decision that decide the life of the wind motorbike taxi or platform-based rider taxi in Bangkok. So yeah, I think that's my answer right
Well,
there.
anyone who wants to do a model with with the research team in Bangkok, please raise your hands. A pilot with them.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
great.
I think my
I
project is also can be applied to another global south as well because like
mhm.
we facing the sparse data sets. We have no data set at all. So to overcome that, I think we need to think more on how to maybe generate or simulate some data and then learn from this data and then how to develop more advanced models. There's more deep learning modeling out there. There's more transformer super fancy mathematical out there, but before we put or we jump into those model, we need some very good data. So hopefully my idea about the demand simulation can help you all in the global south and in another study area that doesn't have any data. Again, email me, please.
Can I just add just quickly though, Priya, it was fascinating what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've been trying to pitch, but I'm not technically as smart as you on the big, is, I mean, there's a potential for big data for urban planning, for rural planning. I mean, if you can track routes, for example, in rural areas or what is being used for, I think that's really valuable. And that's where government can benefit. Where are they putting services? Where are population movements going? Especially in the global south where you have a lot of, informal settlements and townships and, rural areas which haven't been properly mapped. So anyway, I think that can be, if you have a good BMS and you're collecting that data, then how do we use that for the public good as well? So could be exciting.
I'm seeing a lot of opportunities for collaboration. So that's really good. We're actually, one of our roles in the PRISM partnership is to think about, okay, what are we finding from the current research and basically the market and what's out there, and what could be next topics for research that we can kind of whisper into the ear of the funders and say, hey, we're finding this, these could be next steps. So this is very useful for that. And also, if the people who are not panelists today, but are working on the ground and are doing policy and are doing pilots have ideas of where we need funding, where we need research, etc., please let us know, because that's a little bit of the role that we have to try to build those bridges and articulate between the different actors to create the enabling conditions for this to change. Does anyone else have any questions or comments that they'd like to share before we close out the session today?
I think
No?
Jackie, she raised her hand.
Sorry?
Jackie, she raised her hand, I think. Right?
Yes, If I can jump in, if no one else is.
Go ahead. Yeah, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, no, I just wanted to comment on, the data question. And I agree that, having sensors and having big data will be really valuable, but that shows how people travel, not how they would like to travel. And I think it's very important, and we emphasize this in the PRISM work, to engage with the key stakeholders and get their views on the research. And so I was curious, well, I'd love, first of all, Park, if you're thinking about at some point taking your, map of optimized stations maybe to a different scale, and then really show it to the people who, might use that system and get their feedback. I know it's hard because you don't have a lot of electrification yet in, in Bangkok, but maybe you could do something like that in Kampala, where there is a lot more electrification. So I just really wanted to point out the importance of doing this more co-produced research. And on that, I'd also love Tom to share just a minute, if he could, on some of the unique things that he's doing directly with the drivers in Kampala and collecting critical information. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind also just letting people know about that important work you're doing, I think that'd be really great.
Sure, Jackie. Thanks for giving me a soapbox. Yeah, so with the Ljubljanska research group, work with two drivers and two profs at Makerere University, and basically we do quarterly reports. So we survey motorcycle taxis. These days our sample size is about 392, and we survey every 3 months. We collect a really wide range of data. So we collect data on earnings, on costs, on the type of motorcycle that they have, even what they think of that motorcycle, whether they're thinking of switching to electric, if so, why, if not, why not, and a really wide range. And then we put that data out publicly. So far we put out these reports. We've been doing this for over 3 years now. And I can tell you that you can pull off a survey like this for much cheaper than consultants would have you believe. And especially if you work with people from the sector who know the sector, right? So they understand the questions, they understand what you're getting at. But yeah, long story short, Kampala is a super dynamic place for the Boda sector. And I think that there's more to be done. There's a lot more to be done in terms of getting this data out there. So unfortunately, anytime I have to write about this two-wheelers and so on, I end up having to cite data from Kampala because this data, as so many of us know, is just not there for others. So yeah, I would love to see similar. I'm sure you've done some of your own data collection there, Shantha. And I think having a place, what would be really wonderful is if we had a place where all this data could come together and you could have, much easier to have comparative studies as well to understand like what's happening in rural Zim versus Harare versus Joburg versus Nairobi and what have you. But yeah, happy to chat with anybody about that afterward, or share kind of how we pulled that off.
Thanks so much. We're almost at time, but I think this was an awesome session. I hope that for people who were not the speakers, it was also insightful as well. There is so much collaboration that can happen, especially in an emerging space like this one, where there's a few people doing a little bit of things and we realize how much more there is to do. And if we do it together, I think, especially when there's very little resources, very little funders, very little, like few people doing the work, it's much easier to collaborate, to get more support or bigger funding. And also that idea that Tom was saying about like the collaborative and comparative studies is something we've started to do a little bit more in the PRISM partnership, having the different living labs exchange knowledge and do some comparative analysis. And I think in general in pop transport, there's things that are common as a system or as a operation in different places, but there's so many things that are context specific. So I think doing that comparative work is very useful to figure out what are the minimum things we should be thinking about everywhere, and then from there, how to contextualize the operations, the technologies, the regulation, the policy in different work. So I think this is a conversation that can continue. We're going to continue doing a lot of work on electrification, but also on 2 and 3 wheelers in the future. So I think it's a conversation that will be continuing. We're hoping to have more spaces to be able to articulate and strategize together. So thank you all for being here today. And I hope to see you soon. In December, we're going to have our last meet and greet of the series this year. We're going to be talking about user motivations and needs based on different research projects and again, practitioners around the world. So if you're interested in that part, the user needs and perspective, please join us. We'll be sending out the information soon. And also, if you have any suggestions of topics that you would like to have us include in next year's meet and greets, please let us know as well. Things that need more discussion, things that we haven't covered yet, things that you're researching and think the wider network could be interested in learning, or where you would want to connect with more professionals and practitioners on. So we're always open to that feedback from the network itself. I see a lot of things going on in the chat. I hope we have enough time to read the different comments, but yeah. We'll see you in a couple of months in our last meet and greet of the year. Thanks so much to the speakers. Thanks to Jackie and the PRISM team. And also thanks to VREF for the support for these meet and greets. See you all. Good morning, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. And see you soon.